For this video, I want to discuss the spiritual war between syncretism and dogma, the struggle over meaning, power, and transcendence. Throughout human history, religious and spiritual traditions have been shaped by the tension between syncretism and dogma. Syncretism is the blending of different beliefs and traditions, and it has been always viewed with some sort of hostility, suspicion, and particularly by those who favor dogma, which is a rigid adherence to a particular doctrine or system of belief. The conflict between these two approaches is not just an intellectual debate, but a spiritual war waged over authority, power, and the monopolization of truth. One of the major sources of contention in this struggle is the way people interpret language and meaning. The desire for a singular absolute truth leads many to reject relativism, viewing it as a threat to their cultural or religious supremacy. Thus, in turn, this fuels missionary zeal and conversion efforts that are often less about enlightenment and more about domination. So, when we think about it, the divine mystery, whatever form it may take, transcends any particular language, culture, or dogmatic framework. Despite this, many resist the transcendental approach because it threatens the established power structures and the human desire to be right. This video will explore why people reject transcendentalism even though it makes the most sense, examining the role of power, fear, cultural superiority, and human psychology in shaping religious and spiritual discourse. So let's talk about the nature of dogma and the desire for certainty and domination. Dogma provides a clear, structured framework for understanding the universe and our place within it. It offers a sense of certainty, an answer to life's most profound and unsettling questions. Many people gravitate towards dogmatic traditions because they crave stability and order in a chaotic world. Religious dogma, whether it stemmed from Christianity or Zoroastrianism or Islam or Judaism or Hinduism or any other traditions, often codifies beliefs into strict doctrines, which followers are expected to accept without question. This rigidity serves an important function. It reinforces social cohesion by unifying people under a shared narrative. When a society collectively adheres to a specific dogma, it creates a sense of belonging and identity. However, this structure also breeds an inherent resistance to alternative perspectives. If the truth is singular and absolute, then conflicting beliefs must necessarily be false. This explains why relativism is often demonized. It is seen as a slippery slope that undermines the foundation of most dogmatic systems. Those who embrace relativism challenge the idea that any one tradition holds a monopoly on truth, which can be deeply disturbing and unsettling for those invested in rigid belief structures. Now let's talk about syncretism, which is the threat to religious authority here. Syncretism is the blending of different religious traditions and is often regarded as heresy by institutionalized religions. Historically, syncretic movements have been suppressed because they threaten the central religious authority. For example, in the early days of Christianity, church leaders sought to distinguish their faith from pagan traditions and labeled syncretic practices as dangerous and corrupting. Despite this resistance, syncretism has always flourished. Many major world religions, including Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam, incorporate elements of pre existing spiritual traditions. The syncretic nature of religion is undeniable, yet, religious institutions often resist acknowledging this because it undercuts their claims to the absolute truth. When syncretism is embraced, it opens the door for a more inclusive and adaptive spirituality. This threatens the hierarchical religious structures which rely on exclusivity and doctrinal purity to maintain domination and control. If people accept that divine truth can be found in multiple traditions, then religious authorities lose their grip on defining and enforcing orthodoxy. Let's talk now about cultural superiority or supremacy and the weaponization of conversion. The resistance to transcendentalism is also deeply rooted in cultural supremacy. Historically, religious conversion has often been a tool for domination rather than spiritual enlightenment. Missionary efforts, whether by Christian, Muslim, or other religious groups, have frequently been driven by the desire to assert cultural superiority rather than necessarily a genuine pursuit of divine truth. Colonialism and religious expansion have gone hand in hand, with religious conversion often serving as a justification for conquest. Indigenous spiritual traditions were frequently dismissed as simplistic, primitive, or demonic in order to validate the imposition of foreign religious systems. This is not unique to any one faith. Throughout history, dominant cultures have used religious dogma to erase and absorb the beliefs of what they viewed as weaker societies. The rejection of transcendentalism in favor of dogma can therefore be understood as a form of cultural defense. If one admits that other traditions contain better divine truths, or even any shred of divine truths that are just as good as the original, then one also admits that one's own tradition is not inherently superior. This is an uncomfortable realization for those whose identities and power structures are built upon religious exclusivism. So now let's venture into the fear of the unknown and the limits of language. One of the biggest obstacles to embracing transcendentalism is fear. The fear of uncertainty, of losing control, and of confronting the unknown. Dogmatic belief systems provide comfort by offering clear-cut answers, whereas transcendentalism requires embracing diversity and mystery. Language plays a crucial role in shaping our spiritual experiences, yet it also turns into a limitation on our ability to fully grasp the divine. Many religious conflicts arise because people become fixated on the literal meaning of words rather than their underlying truth. The divine mystery, by its very nature, transcends human language and cultural constructs, yet people continue to fight over terminology, fight over doctrine, and fight over interpretation. The idea that ultimate reality is beyond words is not new. Many mystics across religious traditions over the centuries have argued that the divine cannot be fully articulated, only experienced. Yet, religious institutions often resist this perspective because it diminishes their authority as interpreters of sacred texts. If divine truth is beyond human language, then no single religious leader or scripture can claim monopolistic, exclusive access to it. Let's talk about the monopolization of being right. Perhaps the greatest reason people resist transcendentalism is the human desire to be absolutely in the right. Religious dogma often grants its followers the assurance that they possess the upper hand, the one true path, the path to salvation and enlightenment. This fosters a sense of superiority and, in many cases, justifies the exclusion and even the persecution of others. Transcendentalism, on the other hand, challenges the notion that any one perspective holds a monopoly on truth. It requires humility, the acknowledgement that one's own understanding is limited and that wisdom can be found in many places. This is a truly difficult position for many people to accept because it removes the psychological security that dogmatic belief provides. For example, I myself, even though I may embrace Christianity as more what my belief system is, I'm not going to consider it the absolute truth. I'm going to look to other ideas. It is not necessarily about any one religion being the best or the one that is the truth and all else are falsities. We get into these battles of tribalism between the us and the them, and this is when followers want to ensure loyalty. So transcendentalism will distort rigid distinctions and will allow for spiritual exploration rather than just dogmatic allegiance. So the conclusion here is that for the path forward, the spiritual war between syncretism and dogma is ultimately a struggle over meaning, power, and human nature. Dogmatic belief systems offer certainty, community, and structure, but they also breed exclusivism and intolerance. I would argue against something like that because I believe syncretism and transcendentalism can open the door to greater spiritual inclusivity but challenge deeply entrenched religious and cultural hierarchies. In other words, view it all as good. View it all as things which invite us to really experience the divine on the greatest, most spread out level. It does not need to be monopolized by any one tradition. People want to resist this idea because it threatens their sense of certainty and power. The rejection of transcendentalism is not based on a lack of truth, but on a deep-seated fear of losing control and authority and wanting to cling to the one true religion that has some sense of domination. As humanity continues to evolve spiritually, we must confront these fears and acknowledge that wisdom can be found across traditions. Embracing transcendental perspective does not mean abandoning one's faith. It means recognizing that the divine is too vast to be contained within any single framework. Only by overcoming the desire to be right can we truly approach the sacred with humility and openness, allowing us to move beyond the conflict and towards deeper understanding. If you've ever been to, say, like a Caribbean island, what you may find is that based on the various Christian faiths that have taken root there, there are still those on those islands who incorporate their own indigenous native beliefs. For example, in Haiti, while many have embraced the Roman Catholic Church, you'll find that many of them identify the saints with what were previously their local deities. In other words, the saints almost become like a sort of I don't want to call it a cover, but a symbol of something that was previous. So one particular saint may be what is the previously the god of protection. Another saint might be what was the god of water and being able to understand emotions. Or another particular saint might have been what was once the god of the rivers and the trees and the sun, and so on and so forth. A lot of it gets incorporated because that is how human beings are in general. Human beings are always evolving. Everything that we know now was never given to us in a single instant. It's something that has evolved over time. As earlier explained in the video, that many religions themselves are syncretic. For example, when we look at Judaism, Judaism looked to local religions, particularly those that were in Canaan, and took many of their best ideas and then transformed it in other ways and then distanced themselves from those same Canaanite religions. So as a result, at that point they viewed that Judaism is superior to those other local indigenous religions. And this goes on all over the world. At some point in Islam got the idea that, hey, we had Judaism before us, we had Christianity before us, but we're not going to just incorporate those ideas, but we're also going to add our own elements which come from Arab culture, and which then leads to Muhammad as the prophet that is revered in Islam and his interpretation of who the supreme God Allah is. It just happens all around, and it's part of the natural progression, but many people refuse to admit that. Many people don't want to be honest about that. Many people don't want to come clean about that. Many people just want to say, no, this book has the ultimate truth. Everything else you've been taught is a lie. That's just not reasonable, and that really can't capture the divine, because the divine was always something that was beyond human language, human reach, human understanding. We receive snippets of it to various people over the years and over time, but no one person should have a monopoly on what the divine truly is. And so, for the most part, I would definitely believe that the divine is definitely benevolent to a large part, but that doesn't mean that trials and adversities and opposition doesn't come up in a person's spiritual path. There are always going to be many things to the story that sometimes require us to accept pain, cruelty, harshness, and other things as part of the things we go through for our spiritual enlightenment. I hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed putting it together for you all. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.